Welcome to the Be on the Move podcast, hosted by Andrew Ronquetto. Through thoughtful conversations, we explore how innovation fuels growth for humanity, uncovering the stories and ideas that shape lasting impact. And now your host, Andrew Ronquetto.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Be on the Move. This is that podcast where we've been exploring what purpose-driven performance as well as holistic wellness can look like in action. And today, I'm really excited to have Michael Levitt on the show. He's the founder and Chief Burnout Officer. So think about that for a second. Chief Burnout Officer. I know we're all talking about it these days, of a company called the Breakfast Leadership Network. And he's also not only just a global leader in this space, he's been focusing on burnout prevention as an author, as a keynote speaker, as well as of a top 20 leadership podcast himself. So there is a lot of insights you can get from this conversation from Michael. I'm looking to go deep with him here and really find ways to reclaim our energy and set those boundaries that can be healthy to help us design our work, both in our personal lives as well as our work lives, and just get into that exciting part of it. So Michael, welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you here today.
Happy to be here today. Really looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, me too. And you know, I think maybe we just got to start it out there because we've talked about burnout. I'm sure you've talked about it 10,000 times in the last week. But just to ground people, when and I take this from my side because I would say really up until I truly appreciated what burnout was, it didn't matter how many times people said, dude, you should slow down, or, you know, maybe you should think about it. It just didn't matter. So for you, what are those tall tale signs for, you know, that you see in folks that's like, okay, you're there or you're right up on the edge of it?
Yeah, burnout's one of those things where it kind of creeps up over time, and sometimes it happens innocently. People get overwhelmed with the amount of work that they're doing, and I see this a lot, especially with entrepreneurs, where they take on more and more and more, and the stuff they're doing is good stuff. It's not like they're wasting their time, but what happens is they just overwhelm themselves and they don't harmonize that with other parts of their lives that isn't work. And when we see that, you start seeing the fatigue. You start seeing, people having sleep problems, or maybe they literally just don't look as good. There's something that's off with them, and also too, it impacts all kinds of different things. Your mental capabilities, your cognitive abilities, your digestive system, all of these things start getting impacted when you're overly stressed. And if you don't address it, it can definitely take some short term, if not long term, impacts on your life to the point where it can really get you in a whole lot of trouble. So it's not something, and I hear this all the time, well, I'll just work through it, which is so ironic because you're working too much, and I'm just going to work through it. So you're going to work more on top of you're already working more to fix this. Now you're just going to be working more. It's like you're not taking a step back and going, okay, why am I working so much? What's going on here? And there's a lot of factors involved, of course, but a lot of it is just, you know, and sometimes it's ego. To be honest with you, it's like
True.
sometimes it's like I, I need to prove this, or I have to show them I'm right, so I'm going to do this, and you end up, stubbing your toe, just to try to prove something. It's like no, it's like what do you need to do? When's it due? What do you need to get it done? Get it done. And I think we overcomplex things, and what happens when we do that is just overwhelms us, and that's what turns into burnout. Is when we have overwhelming, prolonged stress.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think the hardest thing, and you were alluding to this, is in some ways, how do I even say no? Because I mean, we'd be real about it, is you know, it's hard to say whether jobs out there are real or not. You know, if it's like, okay, if it's not to say jumping ship is the answer, but for some people it might be the answer.
Mhm.
You know, talking with leadership is hard because they're telling me I got to return to the office, and that doesn't make any sense. So I've lost my trust, or the culture feels like it's in tatters. There's just a lot of, you know, we could say there's a lot of negativity out there, but I would say there's a lot of positive conversation in this too, because we're actually talking about it. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's important, and we see, Gartner does studies all the time about employee engagement, and that number continues to sink.
It
and
does, yes.
it's atrocious. It's a 7 out of 10. Basically 7 out of 10 people in your workplace are not engaged. So you're like, okay, think of this in a sports analogy. So you got a team, what basketball, hockey, football, baseball, whatever, and you have 70% of the team just we're here. We're not going after it. Well, how many games are you gonna win? Probably none, or you might win a few, but you're not gonna compete for any championships. And you go, well, you got to motivate them, and do this, and it's like, you, good luck motivating people. Motivation is one of those things where it's like you it, everybody thinks, well, we can motivate them to do this. Motivate them with what? Money. Okay, and I know, financial. 7 out of 10 Americans are buried in debt right now, so I get the financial challenges are a huge backdrop to a lot of things that are going on right now. But I've seen this personally with even myself and also, leading teams. You give somebody a raise, you can give them like a significant raise, and I've done that before. Where it's like it was a double digit percent increase. Now this is where everybody says, okay, where do I send my resume, Mike? No, 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 no. I'm not. I don't work in that industry anymore, and I'm sorry, I can't do it. Yeah, I wish I could, but I can't, so I won't. But what I found, was it was a very short term, basically dopamine hit for the person.
Yep.
They were happy, but then normality sinks in and their performance was what their performance was. It didn't buy any extra. They didn't go above. I mean, they did a little bit for the most part. Most people will not go above and beyond. They're like, well, that's what I should have been paid before anyway. So there's this mindset that kicks into, and mindset is a huge component. That's why I can go into organization. I can see people that are burned out, and I can see people that aren't, and they could be doing the same job and the same workloads, and you're like, okay, there's something different here, and a lot of it is mindset. Also, whatever's going on in their individual lives, that's something that can be a part of it. But you mentioned something a moment ago, with the trust situation. Trust is really bad right now. The communication is horrible at best, if non-existent. There's just no trust, especially with these organizations that sent everybody home back in March of 2020 and saying we're going to be remote. Everybody said, "Oh, cool. All right. Well, reconfigure.
Reorganize.
I'm
Yeah.
going to reconfigure my life, reorganize. I'm going to move maybe out of the city, go out, into the country a little bit, get a little bit more elbow room in real estate, get a good internet connection, do my job, be productive," and they've done that. There's plenty of studies that indicate that productivity stayed the same or increased, and the organizations are like, everybody back. We can debate this ad nauseum. I know all the sides. I've seen them all, and I've had conversations about everything. It depends on what the organization's customers' needs are, but that's usually not what they're basing it on. They're basing it on the ego, and in many cases, the lack of managerial skills from management and leadership, because they don't trust their employees are actually doing the work, and they think they're sitting on their couch watching Netflix all day. And my argument to that is, well, what are you assigning them? What's the work you're giving them? Are they completing it? Is it completed well? Are there mistakes, or is it accurate? And it's this mindset, and I'm originally from Detroit, so I get in trouble sometimes when I say this, especially if I happen to be back home talking about it, which I don't. I keep my mouth shut when I'm there, but um, we need to retire the Henry Ford way of working. It got applied to office work and non-industrial type settings, decades ago. It's still that way. And what we're seeing is the younger generations, your millennials and Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha is coming into the workplace. They look at this work environment stuff. They say it's BS. They don't want any part of it. They're like, screw you. I'll hustle. I'll go do food delivery and drive people around and do some stuff on Fiverr or whatever and cobble together an income so I don't have to deal with that crap.
Yeah.
And we have this. I want to call it a power control thing, but it's kind of a power control thing where the quote unquote classic, we'll call it classic way of how we work does need to change. I firmly believe that. I'm Gen X, so we see it from all battles. We see the boomer generation hating on the millennials and vice versa, and we've seen that battle go on for a long time. And then of course we kind of giggle to ourselves and we tell them, you guys are both the same type of people. And
Yep.
if you want to see blood pressure rise, literally see what blood pressure rise, say that to a boomer that they're like a millennial. Oh my God, that is
Yeah.
so fun. I love doing it. I say it with kindness and cheekiness, of course, because that's what Gen X does. Our phrase is the bear ain't gonna poke itself. So let's see what happens. Um, but ultimately, work needs to evolve and harmonize the skill set that everybody brings. And there's so many opportunities too, because I interviewed John Shepard a few months ago on my show, and he's an attorney in the East Coast, and his focus in his firm and a lot of the work that he does is the multi-generational workforce. And working in a law firm, he's got senior partners that are senior aged, and he's got very young, new attorneys in the mix. And skill sets, viewpoints, views on life, all that stuff are like different planets in many cases. But how do you get all those to work together? And the key thing is trust, seek to understand. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us don't take the time to do is just to seek to understand.
For
Okay,
sure.
why is this important to you? Okay, Jeff, you're millennial. You've got a small family. You're still you're starting to get your gears. Your management level now. Things are starting to cook for you. You know, what does work look like for you in order for you to be the most successful you can be? Because in a shift that I'm seeing slowly, but I'm seeing it is, we're kind of moving away from this managerial type of way of approaching your teams to more of a coaching type of way.
Yep.
And it, it's subtle, but it's huge because going back to the sports analogy, it's like the coach doesn't go do the plays. The coach, coaches the players to execute the plays. Coach isn't out on the field or on the court or on the ice. They are over here. Here's what you do. Go do it.
Hopefully not screaming and yelling.
Depends on the
It
coach.
depends
They're
for sure.
we've seen a shift in coaches as well, where
We have, yes.
coaches that used to be that way in your face and yelling and stuff, a lot of the younger players now are going, and there's, I can think, I'm not going to mention any names, but I know of a hockey coach that has a reputation. It's well documented. Not individuals not liked very much at all. Was very successful as coach, not liked by a lot of people, and his approach was pretty much in your face, this and all kinds of other stuff too that didn't need to happen. Where there's other coaches that are, you hear the phrase players coach, and they're supportive and all of that. But what we see a lot of times, especially when there's coaching changes, is you have a coach that's really tough on the players, and they're like, this always on my backside and all that good stuff. So they get rid of that coach and they bring in somebody that's a buddy, and that works for a while, but then they stop performing, so they got to bring in somebody else, and that's
It's a
that's just
ping
kind of the
pong.
cycle of lead, and we see
Yeah.
that in a cycle of leadership too. And so, long story short, e- organizations need to take a look and go, okay, how do we get the work that we need to get done to the best of our ability? How do we create a situation where we can be open to new opportunities, business expansion? Just because people are buying this product today doesn't mean they're going to buy it a year from now. And what will we do about that? If someone says no, we're not going to be buying this anymore. We're going to be doing this. Okay, what does that look like? How do we shift? Do we have any options on that? Because The companies that don't, and they think, well, that's how we've always done it. Well, guess what? They're going to be done at some point, and the writing is always on the wall. But they don't unfortunately notice it, and next thing they're going out of business, and that's a tragedy that in many cases could have been prevented.
Yeah, I agree. And man, there was so much baked into what you were talking about here. And I hope people like picked it up, because I know I was like, yep, I can see it. I can see it. And one of the things you said right here towards the end, but also tied it in with just the whole mentality of like a coach and the way a team plays out, is I think that is
Mhm.
so fundamental, and partly something that is really broken in today's world. In the
Yeah,
sense that if you keep with that analogy, and then you apply it to the corporate world, most of those managers are on the field. I mean, they are blocking and tackling every day, every moment, because they haven't created or haven't been able to create that space to coach. And it's
yeah,
and I would say the other part of it is they haven't also been given the tools and the assets and the experiences to know what it means to coach. It's fascinating in that regards when you take that analogy and you just keep building on it, because somebody becomes a manager, and I wrote about this a long time ago, but I was like, you become a manager, you're looking for the fireworks, you're looking for the celebration, and it's like, here's more work, and here's people that you're accountable for, and dot dot dot, and you're like, and that was
mhm,
worth 10%, 5%, whatever percent. It's not about the perks, it's not about the cash at the end of the day. Like you said, those are small wins. You look at benefits, and most of the time it's like 1% usage, because it's like, well, not on my time. I want you to do it on your time. So you work for me 9 to 5, whatever it is, and then you can go use Headspace, or you can go use the gym perk, or whatever it might be. And so it is like, I think where you're talking about, it is a bi-directional conversation. It's not just the company's fault or the organization's fault. It's not the individual's fault. It's really, to your point, creating this new dynamic that says, how do I get the most from you? And oh, by the way, it almost has to be hyper personalized.
yeah, yeah. And one of the things we've seen in the UK, rolled this out a couple of years ago, and we're seeing some traction on it, not as much as I would hope, but we're seeing a lot of the 4-day work week, and I'm not talking about the classic. Okay, well, instead of 40 hours in 5 days, you're doing 40 hours in four, and they're like, well, you get an extra day, but that extra day you're recovering from working long shifts every day. So they've introduced the 432, so it's like you work 8-hour shifts 4 days a week, and you get paid what you were paying before. Now, um, your CFO is probably convulsing on the floor right now if he hasn't heard this, because they're like, "Well, we're paying more, we're getting less." The the average, and again, I'm talking about things that are dropping. The average number of hours of productivity you get out of an employee in an 8-hour day, at best, might be 3.5 hours.
Oh, I was going to
So
say like 20%. So I was dropping it even lower.
it probably is. As disgruntled as a lot of people are right now, I'm guessing that number is probably a lot lower. You might be getting a couple hours at best. And it's not that they're sitting there on their phones for 6 hours and doing other
No.
things. No, there's silos, there's waiting for people, it's feedback loops, it's meetings after meetings. My brother years ago worked for an automotive sector company, and they had a meeting to determine why they had so many meetings. And they didn't come up with a solution. So they probably booked another meeting. Or my wife just the other day, this was comical. She gets invited to, she works in transportation, an international company, and she got an invite for a Teams meeting, and it was to go over, your annual goals and things like that, which was weird because she got this invite and a lot of other people at her location didn't. So she gets, the email. It's like, all right, I'll go show up. So she shows up, and they all go, "Hey, why are you here?" I got an email saying I need to be here, but you're not supposed to be here. Okay, but I got an email sent directly to me saying that I need to be part of this meeting to determine our goals. And in the portal, when I go to click on the drop down list, to select, the types of goals I want to work on. There's nothing in the fields, but you're not supposed to be in this meeting. Yeah, but you invited me to this meeting. So there was this endless loop forever. Turns out that our friends in HR, I love them, but sometimes, man, uh, anyway, they had misclassified her in employee designation somewhere in their 18,000 systems that they're running for some reason. So, well, I think we've got you misclassified. So, and she said, so do I need to be in the meeting? You can stay if you want. I'm like, I don't want. I'm not supposed to be here, and I'm misclassified. So let me know when the system is, adjusted to where I'm supposed to be. And I'm like, I told her, so you know what's going to happen. It's the end of year. They're going to say where are your goals, and
Yep.
you can save these emails,
Yep.
create a separate folder for this, so you can give them the email chain and go. And I said, you might even want to say, okay, just to confirm our conversation in the meeting. So I got the transcript for the meeting already saved. I said, send them the transcript because they're going to say, where's your goals? I couldn't enter them because you didn't classify me. Well, you're in the wrong system. Yeah, you told me that 9 months ago or a year ago. Obviously, you haven't done anything. That's just a real life wild example of why people are so disgruntled because the systems that are being used are not being configured well or used well or trained on or anything. You'd be better off using a piece of paper and a
Seriously.
pencil. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And they're like, oh, I used to work in software development and worked for a couple software companies. And whenever a company say, yeah, we're going to roll out a new system, everybody knows what that's going to be. It's going to be a blank show at best because no matter how good the other company is, they say, well, we'll migrate you from your old system, new system. It'll be seamless. It'll be turnkey. And like, yeah, the key you're turning is you starting your car because you're getting the heck out of that company because it's a mess. That's the only key that's going to be
Yep.
turned, and it's absolute joke because and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody because the company that wrote the new software that you bought did not write the other one. Now, yes, they might be able to read code and stuff like that, but you're it's apples and oranges, and you're trying to get them together. And yeah, it might make an interesting cocktail, but they're different. The consistency is different on them. So yeah, it's one of those things where organizations are like, "We got a new system, it's gonna make things more efficient." But you don't understand what your workflow is. And I've seen this time and time again. I remember a company I worked for, the board of directors was, talking about all the different things they wanted the company to do. And one of the directors on the board finally stood up in the meeting and said, people, who are we? What do we do here? He went around the room. There was 12 people.
12
And
different
he got
answers.
pretty much. And he's like, and again, it's like and of course he said, okay, what's the mission, vision, and values, which the board came up with, and they're on the posters behind where they were sitting. Couldn't say a thing. Like, okay, well, we know what that exercise is all about. And again, these are just examples of why people are so frustrated with this thing we call work because it's stupid. There's so many things that are just stupid about it, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been in those situations myself, and I sometimes felt like I intentionally had to be the punching bag for my teams. In the sense of here's the organization for all those not watching. I'm drawing this big bubble, and then here's me, right between myself and executive management, who's throwing down all these great ideas, and then everybody trying to get work done,
Hmm.
and just filtering the noise out constantly. You need to change, you need to do this. No, you have these 5 things you need to accomplish at the end of the year. If you don't accomplish those 5 things, there is nothing I can do to help you. Doesn't matter whatever else is going on. These are the 5 things. Like it's like it's hard because I felt, like I said, I felt like a punching bag because I'm always,
Hmm.
well, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they engaged in this way? And I'm like, because 3 months, you're going to do it a different way. And what I need them to do is stay on top of what's happening right now. I
Yep.
need them to get the work done in front of them. I don't need them to be running off into space about something that they have zero control over. Like,
Yeah. And people will spin their wheels on stuff and nothing gets done. Whether it's
yep,
too many meetings or it's just unclear expectations or outcomes or what's the deliverable, when's it due? And this is something that I've had, thankfully, some great bosses over my career, and I completely stole from them their methodologies on a lot of things, including
or
okay, here's
borrowed or evolved,
yeah, yeah,
experience.
put my seasoning into it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, here's what we need to do. This is when it's done, or when it needs to be done. Here's the parameters on it. Here's the tools we think you'll need for this. Let us know if you need something else. Do you have everything you need in order to do it? Okay, here's the Gantt chart. Here's the roadmap on it, and here's the check-ins and all of that. Will I periodically check in just to see if everything's going good? Yeah, and it'll literally be a 2 second. Everything good? Yep. All right. And good, and let them do their work,
Yep.
and not overly meet, because if you're meeting all the time, you're not doing anything. Meetings are, whether they're in person or during the remote days, everybody, oh, we need to have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or something like that. All that was is, and I'm going to call managers out on this, a lack of management self-confidence. They needed to have their egos stroked, so they had to have a meeting to show that they were still in control, and
Yes.
taking away from people doing their actual jobs. And it's we see it all the time, and we hear the phrase, that was a meeting that should have been an email. It's because all the time, well, we want to be engaged and we want to check in with our people and make sure they're doing okay. You know how you make sure they're doing okay? Give them all the tools they need to do their job, trust them, be there for them when they do have questions, and create a way or a mechanism for them to do that. Get out of their way. Let them do what you hired them to do. I've had countless conversations with leaders and managers like, well, we don't trust our team. And then I go full on Tom Peters, if you're familiar with who he is.
Yep.
And I go, I love, one day I'm going to reach out to him, and I'll probably just, I'm probably do something old school. I'm just going to write him a letter. Now
There you go.
I'm gonna have to slowly write it because I worked in healthcare for a long time. So doctor's writing is contagious, and because my handwriting is absolutely atrocious. My dad, if he was still alive, would look at me and just like, what the hell happened to you? But it's atrocious. But no, Tom, I'm huge fan. Been a fan of his since first discovered him in the late '80s. So, but Tom would in all likely say, oh, okay, you don't trust your employees. Well, you need to fire them right now.
Yeah.
And I say that, so we need to fire them right now. I can't fire them. Why? Because I need them. They're too good at what they do. You don't trust them, but they're really good. Help me connect the dots, please. I'm missing something here. And that trust is not they don't trust the employee, they don't trust themselves as a manager or a leader. They have self-confidence issues.
I was gonna
Comes
say,
through
yep, pointing back
comes
at
through
yourself. Like,
yeah, and it's, shame on me for taking those cognitive behavioral therapy classes and understanding neurolinguistic programming and the language we use on ourselves and behaviors and habits and all that stuff. I did it because I'm like, you know what? It'd be kind of cool to see. I worked in healthcare, so I was exposed to our mental health team, and knew a lot of the stuff that they were doing. And I thought, you know what, that looks interesting. That might be beneficial for me to have a better grasp on, and I did. And wow, it kind of opened up a door. So I'll see how people react. Now I don't turn it on and like, okay, let's see if we can catch them do something. Not That's not how I approach it. But I'll listen for something like, okay, I see what's going on here. And again, I get it, and I don't blame. I'm not upset with the managers or leaders that have self confidence issues, because guess what? In all likelihood, they were put
where
into
they
those
get it from.
roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were put in those roles, and guess what? Their training manual was a quarter of a piece of paper, maybe. Here's the bathroom code for the fourth floor. There's your training. You got to lead people that are messy, that have things going on in their lives, that could be a caregiver now, or going through a divorce, or have an autistic kid, or they do this. Life, and it's like, okay, but I'm supposed to manage how to get these projects done. Yeah, but you know what? You've got these components, individuals. And I want to call them. I don't want to diminish people, but people are messy, and you have to learn how to navigate around that, because leave your home at work and work at home kind of thing. Well, in a hybrid environment, that doesn't work anymore. So that's not how people are. We don't have this off switch. It's not. We're not the industrial age. It's different, and the more you understand that, the more you can leverage that and say, okay, when can you work? When, and create opportunities for people to thrive, whether it's in office, remote, mixture thereof, morning, evening, whatever makes sense for your client and your team. Figure that out and talk it out. And by all means, use a pencil, because it's probably going to change. Erase it, and because, when back in the early days of the pandemic, when everybody said, "Okay, we're gonna go remote from now on," I immediately went, "They're gonna change that. I know for a fact.
It was too
There's
many
no."
words, all, forever, into the
Yeah,
future. Like, come
yeah,
on,
we're
guys.
we're gonna do this, and they even, some of the big guys, they sold off their properties. So like, oh look, they sold their property. They're obviously gonna stay remote forever. There's this thing called operating commercial leases, and you can lease property or you can buy again. And that's what they did. And all of a sudden, everybody gets upset. You said that. They did, and they changed their mind.
'Cause
And
they're right.
yeah, it's up to you. They're the company. They control the purse strings. Is it an uneven exchange? Yes. But on the flip side of it, there's also a lot of positives. They're carrying all of the risk and insurance and all that other stuff, and giving you an opportunity to work there and level up your skills, so you are more productive and a better employee and have more skills that are marketable, so you could update resume.doc and go somewhere else if you choose to. And you mentioned that earlier too, and it reminds me of when people are going through and they have a difficult job and they hate it and it's the worst place ever and all that kind of stuff. They say, well, I'm just going to leave. Okay, that's good. But make sure you do the work on you to make sure that you aren't an element of why the place is such a bad place, because you see people bounce around all the time. I keep finding all these jobs and they're just all this. I'm like, what's the common denominator in all this? For those of you that remember common denominator, when you studied math, hopefully you did in school at some point in your life, it's like you are. So if you keep running into these things, there's something you're doing or attracting or looking for or putting yourself into that are creating these scenarios. So you got to look and see, okay, what's my role in this? What can I do about this? And I've seen people stay at companies that are not quote unquote healthy for them, but they've done some work so they can navigate through it, and they navigate through the issues. They know what they are, and they continue to thrive and be successful, and they have the right boundaries around things and the right mindset. So it doesn't mean you have to leave the company, but in some cases you do. Really depends on the situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know we're kind of running short on time, but I want to throw a concept out there to you because it's something we've been working on. And I think it ties in a lot to different points you've talked about and I've kind of brought up as well in this conversation, but it's highlighted and highly focused on that moment of transition. So you can think about that transition as a new employee or from, becoming a manager or even becoming an executive. It's not just about like the Weebles or the online learning or the in-person learning. It's this progressive coaching that happens or doesn't happen really in, I would say, 99% of companies, because it's just, I got to get you working on that next thing. I needed this person in this role 6 months ago and it took me 6 months to hire them, whatever it might be. um, what I've kind of found is one thing a company can do is start to set the guardrails and boundaries around what it means in that first 30, 60, 90 days in that
Hmm.
new role. And with their associated managers, advisors, whoever's a part of that journey, so to say, come in and have a very structured approach to saying, here's what we want you to do from a company perspective. Here's what I
Hmm.
need you to do as a manager. And then here's what's happening day to day. And over that 30, 60, 90 days, how do we evolve? Because at the end of it, you can then say, you're still the right person for the role, or maybe we need to shift you into a different area of the organization, or maybe this just isn't the right thing for you. And it becomes a bi-directional conversation at that point. As a
Yeah.
means of no longer, I'm going to say, throwing the book at somebody and saying,
Hmm.
here are the HR guidelines down to, when you can go to the restroom, but rather creating the space to say, I need you to be successful. I need you to be productive. We need to be having the ongoing regular conversation. And for those managers out there say, well, I don't have time to invest in that. I'm like, you're going to be putting 10, 20% into that individual anyway, because you just brought them into a new role or a new position, whatever it might be. So why don't you just structure it in a way
Hmm.
that means you can plan for it in your job and they can plan for it in theirs?
Yeah, it's just providing a roadmap, and
Exactly.
we we know. I think the stat was 63%, and I forgot who did the study on it, but they said 63% of new employees that are properly onboarded. Now, define properly onboarding. You gave a great example of it. If they're properly onboarded, 63% will last at least a year in the organization. If they don't get proper onboarding, then they're gone within a year. It's very expensive to hire people.
Very.
It's
Yes.
a huge, huge expense, and a lot of organizations and executives ignore those costs because they don't show up on the bottom line. They just don't. So that's why when you see organizations with a lot of turnover, management and leadership, a lot of times they may acknowledge it, but they don't really do anything about it to the point where they need to, because it does cost a lot of time, effort. It reduces productivity, so it does impact things. It will catch up with you eventually, but the whole idea is prevention, not reaction. And too often, I saw this in healthcare all the time. Healthcare is compensated for reaction. You are sick. Let me get you better, instead of what can I do to make sure that you don't get sick. And the way the system is set up. It's compensated to treat you when you are sick, not treat you when you are well. And if they ever make that shift, things will change across the board. But
Insurance, everything. I mean,
oh yeah, oh yeah,
it's
and again, and insurance would still be in business because you'd be filing claims on wellness type of programs, or dietary programs, trainings, and even supplements or whatever happens to be, where instead of over the counter, you'd be like, okay, the doctor prescribed me B12. Okay, well, that's covered by insurance now, because we want people to take B12 if they need it, for his example. But the onboarding, and I love how you mentioned that, because it's one of the things that I used to do when I was applying for jobs, when I was working for other people. And it was anybody listening that is looking to apply for jobs, please, I saw this in a webinar that I watched, so I finally get to pass it on. I'm surprised I've never shared this in an
oh, here we
interview
go. Some
before.
juicy details.
It's the 30, 60, 90-day plan. So what you do after you go through the first interview, you get an understanding of kind of what's going on. And depending on how many interviews you're having, if you're having like 10 interviews, don't bother. I mean, if a company can't figure you out you're a good candidate after 10 interviews, they've got other issues, in my opinion.
This is
Um,
true.
the the companies, the best companies I ever worked for, uh, that I love and I hold dear to my heart, was one interview, one, and
Well,
it
and I
was
think
with
that's
it was
partly to the point. Like, I
yeah,
actually tell people, I'm like, when you're hiring somebody, think about their first day. If you actually hire them through the interview process, don't think about their first day, the day that they started the job. Think about it the day that they engaged with the recruiter, because that entire experience with them or the individuals during the interview process already sets a tone for how they're coming into the organization.
absolutely. So this 30, 60, 90 degree, 90 degree, excuse me, 30, 60, 90-day plan is basically what you said, but it's from the employee standpoint. In the
Mhm.
first 30 days, I'm going to do this. The first 60 days, I will do this. First 90 days, I'll do this. Now, in this report, it's high level, of course, because you don't really know the organization. You don't work there. But based on the conversations, ask some questions, you can fill it in. And then what you do, if there's a second interview, or if they're saying we're just doing one interview, then you put together and send it. You send this slide deck to whoever you interviewed with and the team and whatnot. Basically, what that does is it shows that you have this planning mechanism in your head, that you plan things out, short term, long term. And of course, you say, look, there's some things in here. You may think that this is a month 2 priority, or this might be a month 3 priority, or this we should probably do right away. I don't know that because I don't work here yet. So we can shift this stuff around. I tell you this, every interview that I ever did, when I rolled that out, if I didn't get the job, I came in second and blew past other candidates. And they would say, you know what? The other candidate was just a better fit, but that 30, 60, 90-day thing was a big, big deal. And I told them, because I'm not, it's like, okay, you went with the other candidate. I said, well, feel free to use that if you want with your new candidate. You use it as a template if you want. I don't have a problem with that. You didn't hire me, but I'm not like, oh, you can't use that. No, there wasn't. It was talking about their company. Of course, use it. I don't care. But what it did is, again, it helped that organization go, oh wow, you helped us kind of reframe how we can work together, and it it level set, and even to the point of, in there, one of the line items is determine the communication protocols of how you want me to commute and report to you as a manager. How do you want me to report? Do you want email? Do you want Slack messages? Do you want WhatsApp messages? Do you want smoke signals? Do you want tribal grunts? What do you want? What works? And what that does is it establishes a boundary, especially when you start a new job, of when am I expected to work and when am I off the clock? Because these little devices are awesome. You can work any you can work anywhere at any time, but they have a really bad negative side effect. You can work anywhere at any time.
Very
And we're
true.
constantly connected to our iBinkies. That's my brother's nickname for my iPhone, because I'm on it like a pacifier, which is constantly, constant. And I get it. And what's so funny is I have two phones, because international. He was like, "Give me your phone." I'm like, okay. So I'll hand him my phone. I'll grab my pocket, grab my other phone. Like, okay. It's like, I may be dumb, but I ain't stupid. So he just shakes his head. But it's the work device, uh, but ultimately, you're all, even before you start, you're establishing, okay, and figuring out, what's the communication methods and styles. And I have done that. It's like, how do you want me to communicate? What kind of reports do you want? When do you want them? And then you deliver on those, and that way they don't have to ask for it from a manager. You're helping your manager.
Tremendously.
You're managing up, basically,
Yep.
in many cases, because a lot of times these managers may or may not have that skill set. They do, but they don't. So if you're kind of helping them along and making them look good, um, they won't be on your backside as much. If you help them, they'll think you're the greatest thing ever, and that's a good thing to have, because what happens is that builds the trust, it builds the communication, and all of a sudden you start accomplishing everything, and everybody's looking. It's like, wow, you two really work together. That team's working really well together. What's going on there? And a lot of times it's just simple. We figured out how to communicate with each other and update each other and make sure that we're helping each other out in order to accomplish what we need to accomplish. It's
Yeah.
easy. It's easy to do, but unfortunately, it's also easy not to.
I was gonna say that's the last key part. It's easy not to, because we got so many things on the priority list. Well, Michael, I've really loved this conversation. I'm just curious if there's anything else that has popped up in your mind, because we have talked on a lot of topics here, and so I'm sure we've probably almost exhausted it all. And like you said, we got a new tip from you we haven't heard on other podcasts, so I love that and I appreciate you sharing that. But anything else you want to share with folks before we close out today?
I think, especially when it comes to burnout prevention, focus on getting good sleep. Really, really focus on good sleep. And I talk to people that struggle with sleep, and I ask them, "Have you ever gone to a resort or stayed at a really nice hotel?" And a lot of them, of course, have. And I said, well, "What was the bed like?" And they go, "Oh, it's amazing. The pillows, the sheets, the comfort. It was heavenly." It's like, do you know that you can actually buy that type of material, the type of mattress and bedding for your home? You should.
I think you can buy
Create
from the hotel sometimes.
most of them. Yeah, I get an email from, because I'm, with travel, I did a ton of travel in my career, so I still get emails from all the big chains, and, they want me to buy their beds. I'm like, "I only need 1 bed. I don't need 10, but thanks for the invites." But yeah, their pillows and all that stuff. So create that environment for your home, because when you get good sleep, you repair the damage that we do to ourselves on a daily basis, including the stress. So get good sleep. Figure out how to get your best sleep possible night after night. You will feel better in the morning. You'll be more productive, and things won't stress you out as much.
That's a perfect way to end here. And, like I said, Michael, I really appreciate you coming on this call and this podcast and this sharing with us in this episode, just a wealth of knowledge in there. Cause I think even though we didn't hit burnout just nonstop, like you sometimes can, I think we talked about a lot of things that contribute to it and how really leaning into ways of streamlining your workflow can just be a moment of reducing stress as well. So thank you for taking some of the time to share all of this with our listeners today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, and to those listening out there, I always like to end this and say, if there's one thing you do this week, take something from what Michael shared and see how you can implement it, because that is the moment where you start to take those micro steps towards healthier living, more balance, more harmony in life. And that's what's really about. It's helping you be at that point where you're happy and you're growing and you're where you want to see yourself in life or working towards it. It can always be a never ending journey. And it's the journey that's the most exciting part. So until the next time, again, thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll talk to you all soon. Cheers.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Be on the Move. Don't forget to follow us, rate the show, and share with others. If you're ready to dive deeper, visit us at beyondplatform.com. Catch you next time.